Representative Labriola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to begin by saying that I agree with the sentiments expressed by the ranking senator and the ranking state representative on this committee and their concerns about this policy shift, as Senator Kissel called it, a sea change. It's a massive, huge, radical change in policy of your board, Chairman Giles. Thank you for coming here. I think it's important that we focus on this. Thank you for patiently answering all these questions, because this is a big issue, and I think that the public should be made aware of this. And this public hearing, I think, goes a long way towards that, shining a light on this, because I would suspect that most people in the general public would not agree with what's been going on. And I noted you used the phrase "room for improvement," and I certainly hope that you take that into consideration going forward. I learned about this from the press. I saw there was a series of articles about it, and right around the same time, I was in court, and I talked to some prosecutors who alerted me to it as well. I've had the privilege of serving on this committee for 21 years. I am a practicing attorney in criminal law for 36 years. I'm in criminal court all the time. I talk to prosecutors and judges. From what I gather, they weren't really aware of what was about to happen, the prosecutors and the judges. Did you make any specific notifications to the prosecutors or judges of this policy shift?
I don't believe we did, no.
Well, I guess then, going back to what I said before, I think it's good that we're shining a light on this, because these are the same people who were involved in prosecuting these particular defendants. And they were the ones who sentenced them or took the plea in a case where a person took a plea bargain. And so they would be the people who were most familiar with these individuals, obviously, and what they were charged with and what they were either convicted of or pled guilty to. My level of concern is quite high. I don't recall being this concerned in my time here in the legislature. I have talked to some prosecutors who prosecuted some individuals whose sentences were commuted recently. And I've talked to some judges who were prosecutors at the time who prosecuted these individuals. We're not talking about small crimes, we're talking about major crimes. These are people who got lengthy sentences, either by accepting a plea bargain or by being sentenced after trial to, in many cases, horrific crimes. And these prosecutors and judges that I talk to, they just shake their head, and they think that the policy that's being implemented is wrong. And so I just feel an obligation as a legislator who has constituents who are members of the general public to ask these questions. Yes. And I know they're tough questions, but I feel compelled to ask them. It seems to me that the victims and the victim's family and the danger to society should be uppermost in your mind in making these decisions. I'm asking these questions. I only have a couple more.
Understood.
But I'm asking these questions because I feel a sense of outrage on behalf of the general public and on behalf of those victims' families, right, where sentences were reduced dramatically. And let's take the first kind of case. There's only two ways a person can go to jail. They either plead guilty or they're sentenced, right, after a trial. So let's take the first kind. A person pleads guilty. It's a plea bargain. So it's a deal. It's an agreement. As Representative Fishbein pointed out, it's like a contract. And in that process, the victim's family, because often the victim's not even alive, the victim's family or the victim themselves has input, and they're considered by the prosecutor and by the judge. And it's a long process, I can tell you. These cases, they take 18 months. There's a lot of court appearances. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot that goes into it. And sometimes the victim doesn't want to testify, or there might be some part of the case where the prosecutor agrees to a particular number. It might be You could get up to 60 years, but the person takes a 30-year sentence. And then they're released under what's been taking place in the last year and a half with, say, 10 years off, or 8 years off, or 15 years off. That strikes me as an outrage to many victims. That's what I'm asking about. I'm not asking about the cases you were just talking about, which I applaud, and those are profound.
Right.
I get it. I'm asking about the other kinds, where a victim or a victim's family might feel as though they were slapped in the face. And so I ask you, do you consider the fact that in a plea bargain, that they were part of that deal at that time?
So heretofore, Representative Labriola, we have not considered in a great way, although we consider everything, we've not considered in a great way this sort of contract as you all have described that goes on between the prosecutor and the victim. We're looking at the case way out, and we're trying to see if the person is suitable for re-entry into society. Victims' input is very important to us, as I've said, and sometimes, you know, when we have to hear victims, it is, as you described, you know, it can be heart-wrenching. But we're trying to assess whether or not, which is under our purview, a person is suitable for re-entry into society. It could be that going forward, victims will control the process. I don't know. But to this point, it's important for us to consider all of those things, jury verdicts, plea bargains, and what the offender has done in those ensuing years to try to make right in the best way they can what they have done.
Well, I think I'm hearing you say that if you were confirmed and going forward, that you would give a greater emphasis to the fact that victims and victims' families were very involved in a plea bargain situation, and that I think you said heretofore you haven't, but maybe I'm assuming that what you're saying is that there's room for progress, and that going forward you would consider that.
I've said that, Representative Labriola. I think, as you know, the governor spoke publicly about this and said he was going to call folks together. I'm told that he's going to do that, so I don't want to get ahead of his policy folks, but, you know, if I am still the chairman, I'll be at the table.
Well, I appreciate that. I just want to ask about the second kind of case, which is where a person goes to trial. They don't take a plea bargain. They say no to the plea bargain. There's always an offer. But they say no, and they want to go to trial, and then they're convicted. Well, that's even a more elaborate process where a victim is involved. Because, of course, if a victim is alive, they're going to testify in almost every case. Certainly, the victim's family members will testify. Loved ones will testify. Spouse, children will testify in many cases. Regarding, let's say it's a murder case. Oftentimes they have relevant information, and so they're involved by testifying. And in this case, it's not that the offender pleads guilty, they're found guilty by a jury of their peers, and then they're sentenced by a judge. And when the judge sentences them, he considers the victim's testimony, not just their input, but he presided over the trial. So he saw very dramatic and poignant testimony. So the judge really considers the victim when a judge sentences somebody after trial. And so that judge, who sat through the entire trial and presided over evidentiary questions, made sure the trial was fair. Presumably it was fair because there was no appeal, or if there was, it was unsuccessful. So the defendant was given a fair trial. The judge listened to the case, sentenced the defendant, and certainly very much considered the victim's input and society as a whole. So I hope, and will you consider that as well in the course of your decision making? Will you consider the fact that the judge factored into his decision on how many years a person should serve, almost in a very big way, he considered the victim's input? Will you consider that in your decisions?
So the answer is yes, as we already have and always do. And as I said, Representative Labriola, we probably do not disagree with the judge when he sees an offender 2 years out or 3 years out, when he has to make that decision at that time. When we see someone under our statutory authority, it's often 25 years out, 30 years out. And the question is, what our assessment is this person suitable for release into society? And if we have assessed that they are, then they get an affirmative answer in their commutation hearing. But often, sometimes it is not met, that threshold. But in answer to your question, yes, we consider what judges have done, prosecutors, victims we hear, they come, we're very grateful for their participation, we know we can empathize with them.
I have no other questions, but I just want one last comment. So it's obvious that you are quite competent, you are knowledgeable, you are articulate, you are passionate. I do think, though, that there is room for improvement. I would like to see the policy radically reversed. I think that the general public would like to see it dramatically reversed. I feel compelled to not support you today. I don't see how I could. But I hear that you are going to much more thoroughly consider victims' input at the time of sentencing, at the time of plea bargain, and that you're going to factor those things in going forward if you are confirmed, and I hope that is true, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, Representative Labriola. Hope to have your support.